Week 6 in the NFL, and we're helping you set your DraftKings lineups with some low ownership players and some bargain buys with SI Fantasy and Gambling analysts Ben Heisler and Michael Fabiano. Fabs, I'm going to start with you. Let's go to some bargain players. These are guys, inexpensive salaries on DraftKings. Who do you want on your roster for Week 6?
Give me Ryan Tannehill, folks, at $5,900. Tannehill is not getting enough respect from the fantasy football community. This guy is averaging over 22 fantasy points per game so far this season. He has scored 18 or more fantasy points in 12 of his last 16 games going back to last season. So he's reliable. 2 of those games came against this week's opponent, the Houston Texans, and Houston has allowed 17 plus points to 4 of 5 quarterbacks, including 3 games with 19 plus points. So Tannehill is a very good play at $5,900. I also like David Montgomery. Heck, every single week I go and look, who's playing the Panthers at running back this week? It's Montgomery at $5,800 on DraftKings. Running backs have averaged over 170 scrimmage yards and the most fantasy points going up against Carolina. Montgomery's also playing more of a featured role in Chicago with Tariq Cohen out. Over the last 2 weeks, he has averaged over 50 snaps played per game. And then Laviska Shenault in Jacksonville at $5,200 is a very strong play. He ranks tied for second among Jaguars wide receivers in snaps played. He's in a virtual tie for the league lead in targets among Jaguars wide receivers. And also keep in mind, last week, he led this team with nearly 15 fantasy points. The matchup this week is very good. The Lions have allowed nearly 9 catches and the 10th most fantasy points to receivers who are lined out wide, including 3 touchdowns. Also keep this in mind. DJ Chark is dealing with an ankle injury. And if Chark can't go against Detroit, Shenault becomes even a better play, both in redrafts and in DFS.
Love all 3 of those picks, Fabs. Let's go over to Ben for some players that can help us separate from the pack, the low ownership guys for Week 6. Ben, who are you eyeing up?
I know you're going to put Shenault in your lineups, Fabs, but I'm really hoping that DJ Chark plays because my quarterback at a low-owned spot this week is Gardner Minchu. $6,400 on DraftKings, and I think that's the lower ownership quarterback in what's going to be a pretty high expected shootout game between the Lions and the Jaguars. Minshew has hit the 300-yard bonus in 3 of his 4 games this year. He's also thrown for multiple touchdowns in 3 of 4 games, and he's also averaging about 22 rushing yards per game as well. And the Lions, even though they ranked top 11 from a fantasy perspective against the quarterback, I just feel like this is going to be one of those high-octane, back-and-forth, high-touchdown matchups that even though the rankings may not necessarily sell Minshew in your favor, I still think the matchup presents itself from a very strong perspective. Then at the running back spot, how about Ronald Jones of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? He's about $6,000. Bucs kind of feel a little bit out of sight, out of mind. They had that Thursday night loss against Chicago last week. And again, a lot of folks are going to want to target Bucs quarterbacks and wide receivers against Green Bay in what is expected to be, a back and forth game where they're going to have to try and catch up against Aaron Rodgers and company. But, Ronald Jones has been sneaky good this year, guys. He's averaging 4.9 yards per carry. He's close to about an average of 1,400 yards on the season. And he's just too cheap at $6,000 based on his volume and what we've seen from him so far this year. So I think he's both a value play as well as a low ownership play, with a lot of folks slightly getting on Tampa Bay from the passing game. And then lastly, guys, Marvin Jones with the Detroit Lions, $5,100. This is a really intriguing play for me. Again, it's a high shootout that's expected. Matthew Stafford versus the Jags defense. They're bottom 7 against quarterbacks. And even though on paper, Marvin Jones is paired up against Sidney Jones, who's actually had a fairly solid year so far, it doesn't really matter because the Lions move their wide receivers around. So he's not going to get the shadow treatment. From Jared Evans of Pro Football Focus, only 3 players have had more red zone touchdowns since 2019 than Marvin Jones: Mark Andrews, Tyler Lockett, and Mike Evans. I think this is a smash spot for Marvin Jones when everybody likely is going to be on both Matthew Stafford and Kenny Golladay. I think you can pivot to a less expensive option and have a chance for a blowout game.
All right, for more great DFS advice, just like you heard from Fabs and Ben Heisler, you can go to si.com/gambling. You can sign up to become a member of SI Fantasy Pro for just $19.99 a month. And that also comes with our DFS lineup optimizer. That'll help you put together some great DraftKings lineups.